Welcome back to A Fine Time for Healing, a place where your physical, emotional, and spiritual well being are all that matter. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show. Today, you're going to love this topic. I know you are. We're going to be talking about adult bullies. You know, I would imagine everybody that's listening to this show has experienced this in some way, some worse than others, some more often than others, and so more prolonged than others. But we have all been up against this in some way. When we think of bullies, most of us think of aggressive kids or teens who terrorize individuals that they perceive as weaker. Yet bullying isn't relegated just to the schoolyard. On the contrary, adult bullies exist everywhere and run rampant in many families, workplaces, neighborhoods, political arenas, and organizations of all types and sizes. And in the media landscape, where conflict, chaos, and fear reign supreme, we witness celebrities, politicians, and other public figures exhibiting some of the most egregious behavior. So today we are so lucky to have Bill Eddy back with us. He was with us in August of 21 when we talked about how to calm upset people. And I know Bill from this show, but I also know him because he's in the organization that I'm in, Family Access with Elaine Cobb, and he does great work with parental alienation. So welcome, Bill. It's so good to have you.
Thank you so much, Randy. Good to be back.
So can you hold up your book so we can see this great picture?
There you go.
Our new world of adult bullies. I said Billies. Listen, that's my husband's name. How to spot them, how to stop them. Yes, we want to know this. Okay. All right, Bill. Well, now let's see your lovely face. All right. This book, I know, you told me took you a couple years. It was in the making. So what was the final straw that made you say, you know what, I have to write this now?
Well, it was the end of 2020, the first year of the pandemic, and there was a lot of conflict in the world, especially, vaccines, masks. There's just suddenly a lot of interpersonal conflict. People would encounter each other at a store. You should be wearing a mask. No, you shouldn't be wearing a mask, and all of this. And I also had more time to think because I couldn't be traveling and teaching like I was used to. And I started connecting the dots and saying, look, there's bullying everywhere, and it's the same basic patterns of behavior. It's really personality-based patterns of behavior. Something doesn't just make someone become a bully. It's more we become aware they're a bully because most bullies do their bullying in private, so most people don't know about it. But we're starting to see it much more in public now. And it's at every level of society, it's really similar patterns of behavior. And so I started thinking, okay, well, there's at least seven, kind of hidden powers that bullies seem to use that catch people by surprise. So I want to put them out there. And I go, oh no, it's eight hidden. Oh, nope, it's nine. Well, if it's nine, we might as well round up to 10.
Okay.
And even that, I kind of squeezed a couple into, one of those, the power of projection and playing the victim. So I made that one chapter instead of two. So I really came up with 10, and there may be more. But I wanted people to see that you can see these, that they're hidden in plain sight, that people give you hints of these patterns of behavior before they get into a bullying relationship with you. And we see this like domestic violence, like parental alienation, as you mentioned, in families. We see this in workplace bullying. We see this in sexual harassment in public. We see this online, certainly. And we also see it in politics. And I guess my biggest message is that everybody needs to be prepared to have a bully in their life so that you're not caught by surprise and you don't overreact, which feeds a bully, or don't underreact, which also feeds a bully. That you have a more assertive, balanced approach. And then you can keep them at arm's length and maybe discourage them from staying in your life. Um, so I guess I started connecting all those dots. And actually, the end of 2020 is now 3.5 years ago. So it's a while back, but it's been percolating all this time.
Sure. And I didn't read your bio. I got so caught up in this discussion, I just didn't read it. But just so that everyone understands, Bill Eddy is the Chief Innovation Officer of the High Conflict Institute based in San Diego, California. He trains lawyers, judges, mediators, and therapists throughout the United States and a dozen other countries in managing high conflict family, workplace, and legal disputes. And he is the author of over 20 books and manuals and has a popular blog on Psychology Today. And one of them is a book called Splitting, which I actually have. So, okay. And I like what you said, it's a very good reason for writing this book. We do want to empower people to be able to deal with this and not become victims of it. So, you say that bullies, the issue is not the issue. The personality is the issue, driving the intensity of the conflict. So what kind of personality are we looking at here?
Well, fundamentally, bullies have a drive to dominate others, and it's to have a relationship like that. It's more than one incident. It's a bullying relationship in which they win and others lose. And it's not like winning a ball game or winning a prize where, nobody really loses, but somebody wins. But with bullies, they want you to lose. They want you to be dominated by them. They want you kind of handy to pick on because it makes them feel more powerful. But I noticed, and my work with high conflict personalities and personality disorders, that it really seems to be a subset of cluster B personality disorders. And those are narcissistic, of course, antisocial, borderline, and histrionic. Not everybody with these diagnoses is a bully because they don't all want to dominate people. But a higher percentage of them do seem to have characteristics which research says they're strong on domineeringness, vindictiveness, and intrusiveness, that this is a common theme for many, but not all people in this cluster B category. And so these really seem to be our bullies. And by understanding that they have traits of these personalities, we can understand that they're stuck, that they're not going to stop themselves, that they see this as justified in their worldview because they lack empathy, they lack remorse, they lack emotional self-control, which are the brakes that people put on themselves in most relationships, but they lack those. And so they go way beyond. So they'll be physically abusive, psychologically abusive, etc. So it seems like it's related to these personality patterns. And we know a lot about those. So it's helpful in understanding bullies, I think.
Yes. You talk about the primitive emotional power of bullies and how it is the flip side of emotional intelligence. As you said, the ability to understand and manage emotions in a relatively equal and respectful relationship. So what do you mean by primitive emotional power?
I'm so glad you asked that question because a lot of people don't look at this aspect. And I think this really helps us understand why we behave and other people behave the way they do that seems like the opposite of what they would do. So let me just take the example of domestic violence. So the bully basically activates three of these primitive emotional powers. And these are emotional powers that all mammals have. And so they're kind of baked into our primitive mind, kind of, as some research say, a lower mind
The
that's not.
reptilian brain or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, in the brain, that we have these kind of automatic mechanisms to help us survive. And they're so automatic, we're not real conscious of them. So the combination that really seems to get victim survivors of domestic violence is, first, they create a sense of fear. You know, the world is a dangerous place. Nobody cares about you. Then they create a sense of rage. And the question is, sometimes, who is this against? Sometimes it's against one of the bully's other targets, but often it's against yourself. That the bully tries to say, you're so stupid, you should be ashamed of yourself. And get people to be angry at themselves. They are ashamed of themselves because the bullies told them they should be ashamed of themselves, but they shouldn't be. But that's an emotional power punch. So you've got fear, you've got anger at yourself, and then that they're the hero. I'll take care of you. You're all you should. I'm everything you should need. You don't need your friends and family. Don't go visit your sister this weekend. I should be all that you need. And so they isolate people, acting as if they're their hero, their savior from themselves. You know, I'll protect you from yourself and your stupidity or whatever. And so these three emotions get us all kind of hooked under the surface, and people's self-esteem just kind of drops and goes down. So that's why I call it primitive emotional powers. They kind of get into your head and immobilize you. Or sometimes, as in other examples, they mobilize you against other people who you don't even know. So it's the two sides, and we can talk a little about parental alienation because it's very similar, only they're getting the child angry at the other parent. So they're afraid that the child, you know, the other parent's a terrible person. He abused you, he abused me, or whatever, or she did, and you should be angry at them, and I'll just take care of you. And I have cases where there's like 19, 20-year-olds who are immobilized. They can't get their life going because they've absorbed that bully's story, that message. And they don't know why. They're hooked by these primitive emotional powers of the bully.
Yes, so true, so true. And let's talk about the BS, the bully story. So, and it is BS. So, and I can relate to so much of what you say in this book as somebody who's an expert in narcissistic abuse. So, we know that narcissists, and now we're going to generalize this and call them bullies, or it's
Yeah.
not only narcissists, it's not only narcissists. So we're going
Well,
to,
I see it as narcissistic bullies, antisocial bullies, and borderline bullies is
okay,
pretty much. So,
okay,
so they are. Part of it is narcissistic bullies.
okay, all right, good. Um, so we know that they create these false narratives, and it's very convincing, but in every case, they are the hero, they are the victim. No matter what they're telling you, every story involves them in some way being a victim or a hero, right?
Yes. Yeah, and what's really interesting about the bully's story is that they're always talking. Bullies are always talking. They talk a lot. And what are they saying? They're telling their story so repetitively that you'll absorb it, even unconsciously, even if you think that's BS. Your brain starts going, well, that sounds familiar. I guess maybe it's true. And I talk in there a little bit about how repetition makes things feel true, even if you started out knowing they were false. And it's just the science of the brain is just fascinating with this.
Talk about,
But
oh, I'm sorry, keep going.
Oh, I was just going to say, but the bully story has the three parts, the three emotions that are the primitive emotions. And so their bully story activates our primitive emotional responses of fear, anger, and love, loyalty for the bully. And so we're kind of like sitting there and they know and they target us with that story, which is BS. It's to give them power. It's nothing about the reality in the world. It's solely to give them power over you.
That's so true. So true. I hear a lot of stories. People say, yeah, when they were a child, this happened with their mother, or this happened with their ex, or this. And I said, don't believe anything. Don't believe anything because every story may have a kernel of truth, but they're fabricated. They're completely fabricated, so you can't buy into them. But these narratives do keep people hooked because they feel sorry for them.
Hmm.
And, somebody can be so severely emotionally abused by a bully like this, and then they begin to feel sorry for them. And I'm like, we need to switch this. You are the one that need it. You need it.
Yeah.
Forget them. They don't need this. Okay.
I can explain why that happens. And it really was working on this book that it clicked into place. Why people feel sorry for the bully. And it seems to be what I call love loyalty. That, there's fear, that's obvious, makes sense. There's anger at somebody, yourself or somebody else. But this third emotion is love loyalty. And the bully tries to tell you they love you, but it isn't really love. It's what they want is your loyalty, that you'll tolerate them, you won't leave them, you'll let them bully you, and you won't complain or fight back. And this goes back to the primitive that mammals, all mammals, have seven emotional systems, including us, only we're more sophisticated at it. But two of those systems, one is caring. They really do care for their young, for each other. And you see moments like this in online these days. You see all these cute, animals caring for each other. But the other part of it is what they call panic or grief. When you see someone in a state of panic or grief, your heart goes out to them and you want to protect them. And how this seems to work with bullies is by telling you they love you, what they really want is your loyalty so that you'll take care of them when they get in trouble. So you'll reach out to them, you'll have empathy for them. And especially the antisocial bullies will be so good at playing the victim that you really want to defend them. And the irony is, I see this in court cases where judges get emotionally hooked by an antisocial person's story and they become furious with the other party who is actually the victim.
Yes. Yes.
And people go, why does the judge hate me?
Mhm.
It's because they've believed the BS, the bully story, the fear, anger, and love loyalty that the bully has inspired. And by playing a victim, and if you don't understand this, and most people don't, but I've studied it and now I just see it everywhere. You can immunize yourself against getting hooked by that and go, wait a minute, is this true or is this a bully story? Ah, it's a bully story. It's not true.
Mhm.
And one of my favorite judges in court one day, I was representing, in this case, a father, and the other side representing the mother, and the other lawyer said something or other that really was BS. And the judge turns to me and says, Mr. Eddy, is that true? Did your client do that? And I said, no, Your Honor, this is what happened. Da-da. And the judge said, oh, okay. Turns back to the other lawyer and says, that's not had to do with cutting off a cell phone, and that's not cutting off cell phone service. Proceed. And that was perfect because we have to entertain the possibility that what we're hearing is BS. And like you said, nowadays, don't just believe stuff. Check things out.
So true. I love that you brought up the court situation. And it's why it's so important to choose your attorney to represent you very carefully, because attorneys that do this work, that have experience, are ready for the BS, okay? They know how to poke holes in it. They know how to just make you look like a fool when you start saying this stuff. But the average attorney does not understand this, and this is where it goes off the rails, right, Bill?
Absolutely. And I'd say the majority, like of family lawyers, don't understand this dynamic. And they don't understand antisocial personalities, which didn't used to go to a lot to family court, but nowadays they find out they can easily win in family court. So there's many more, I'd say, in the last 10 years than I saw in the prior 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
hopefully they'll learn from this.
we're trying, right? We're putting it out there. I know you are, and
Good for you. Yep.
we're trying to put this out there. But I know, listen, there are many of us that are out there trying to make this point. And it's just become so epidemic. It's hard to stop it. It's got a momentum of its own, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's interesting is about family court is many of the judges and lawyers and therapists come out of situations focused on abuse, like child abuse, domestic violence, etc. And so they have an orientation like that, and antisocial bullies manipulate that because they know which story. I once had a case where the woman, and actually I represented men and women about equally, and I no longer take cases, I'm just teaching. But she said to her husband, I think I'll win in court if I accuse you of domestic violence or child sexual abuse, and I'm not sure which one yet. And
Mm,
she really was an antisocial woman. There aren't a lot, maybe a quarter of antisocials are women, but she was, and she was like thinking out loud, what am I going to get away with at court? And she tried. She tried for about 5 years, and every time we were able to defeat her, but not before having him have to go through hell essentially of allegations
right, and a lot of money.
and a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They will tell you what they're going to do.
Yeah, that's what's amazing.
And
They have no
the thing is,
shame.
it just right over our heads, because we go, yeah, oh, come on, they're kidding. They couldn't possibly be thinking that way, because we assume that they think like we do. They do
Right.
not, right?
You're absolutely right with that. And that we have to keep our eyes and ears open that there's some people that really like don't have a conscience, don't have empathy, and they really have different goals than you do.
It's true. It's true. So let's talk about the counterintuitive behavior of the bully, because we we work on logic, okay? When we want to understand someone or something, we use logic. Logic is going to be the opposite of what it takes to recognize them and deal with them. So let's talk about that.
Well, I think in a way it's a different logic, recognizing, I've been talking about antisocial bullies. So antisocial bullies and antisocial personalities in general, and some aren't bullies. Some just, do online scams without trying to bully anybody. Maybe nobody knows they're doing something. But their goal is to get something. Antisocials are like 3-year-olds. I want what I want and I want it now, and I'll do whatever it takes to get it. It might be money, it might be a reputation, it might be a shiny car. How can I get that? And maybe I can steal that. I've got a shortcut, how I can steal that. So their purpose, their logic is I want what I want. But what's also fascinating, and I'll do something that's probably a mistake for an author, but I'll mention somebody else's book that I found fascinating recently. And that's a book titled Sociopath. And it's about a woman growing up reflecting on the drive she has inside of her. And what's interesting is she describes having a pressure build up inside of her to do something terrible, to steal somebody's object, a beloved object. Or, at one point she's in elementary school and stabs another kid in the head with a pencil. And it's like, she says, it builds up inside of me. It's almost irresistible. And I think that's helpful to understand that the logic is they have these drives inside that they may have been born with, because antisocial seems to be more hereditary than the other personalities.
Yes.
And there may be a purpose for it in ancient history. That's why I talk about primitive powers. So it may be this served a purpose, thousands of years ago, when people did need to be warriors to save themselves. They had to fight and stab people in the head. And so she has these drives inside that she doesn't even understand. And I think we have to realize that that's the logic with narcissistic bullies, that they want to be seen as superior and they'll walk all over anybody to be seen that way. And the borderline bullies who lack the emotional self-control, they fear loss of a relationship, and so they become abusive to keep their partner. Totally doesn't make sense, except in their psychological system, I'm holding on to this person so that they won't leave me, without connecting the dots that if I behave this way, they really are going to try to leave me. So it's that they have these different logics that are foreign to most of us.
Mm-hmm.
But if you learn that logic, you say, oh, okay, well, if I'm going to leave this person, this, they say, borderline bully is going to panic and beat me up. And so I'm going to tell him I'm leaving from my lawyer's office, not, not in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. So if you get familiar with their logic, then you can protect yourself much better.
So true. So true. Um, it's just, when somebody has been exposed to one of these people for long periods of time, bully for long periods of time, they lose their sense of emotional and mental equilibrium. So they they may have moments or glimmers of clarity, but they resort back to the programming. The program is so ingrained, and you talked about the repetitive stuff, which
Yes.
is to me that's sort of like, because we know they brainwash and we know there's psychological warfare, and that's like, POW kind of stuff where you're repeating and repeating and repeating, or you're turning the lights
Yep.
on all night or something like that. This is where the psychological warfare, I think, comes in. But they embed it in your very you're conscious, and you don't know it's happening to you, right?
Right, right. Well, I have an example. It's a domestic violence example in there of a British musician, who I wasn't familiar with, but I think a lot of younger people might be, FKA Twigs. And she describes being inside an abusive relationship. And this usually goes on in private, but she brought a lawsuit against the guy and said, I want to go public so people know kind of what it's like and what to watch out for. But he so controlled her and her mind. One of the things is he wouldn't let her look men in the eye. that he felt threatened by that. So if they'd be out to dinner and someone say, "So what do you want to order?" She wouldn't look the man in the eye because her boyfriend would be really angry if she did that and punish her for that. And so she learned to kind of, turn inward and be ashamed and careful, and her self-esteem just dropped. Well, she was fortunate that she only spent about a year in that relationship, and she got out with the help of a therapist and such. But he cut her off even from her creative team because she was a famous musician, singer. And he told her, and this is an example, like I said earlier, you don't need your creative team. All you need is me. And you can't trust them. They're out to take advantage of you. Remember, fear of a crisis, anger at the villain. So her creative team, he tried to turn into the villain in a crisis and just depend on me. I'll take care of everything. So she somehow figured out this, I got to get out of this, use a therapist to boost her self-esteem, and got out. And what she says is, this is amazing how this could happen to me. She said, I've got a wonderful home in London, and they were somewhere in the US, maybe LA, I think. And I didn't just go home. I was so fearful and so isolated emotionally. Um, she's wealthy, and she didn't use her wealth to get out. She just her self-esteem just sunk into the ground. And hearing her story is just so helpful, I think, for people who don't have all these resources and will recognize, hey, that's what's happening to me. I've got to get out, and I can get out. And that's a lot of the theme of my book. You can stop bullies. And that's part of realizing what you're dealing with.
Yeah, I had one client in particular that was married for over 30 years, and she was being physically abused.
Yeah.
And when they would be out in the car driving somewhere, she had to look down at the floor because
Oh,
if she looked out the window, he would say, "You're looking at that man, you're looking at that man," and then they get home and she'd get beat up. So,
yeah.
so there's a new documentary on Netflix called Dancing with the Devil. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a lot like what you're saying, where there's these dancers who are trying to build a career, and there's this monster that comes along, this bully that comes along that says, "Oh, I'll make you a star." But it turns into a cult, and they get
Yes.
stuck in that. Did you see it?
I didn't see it. I've heard the title and I just wrote it down now, and now I really want to see it.
Hmm.
Um,
It's interesting.
and the thing you said about cults is in all these situations, what they're doing is very parallel to a cult. That it's that primitive emotional power. People say, why don't people just leave cults? Because when they're in a cult, their sense of identity and self-agency just goes through the window, and they become dependent on the leader and the group in this primitive emotional way. And that's why I want to alert people to this is primitive stuff, and you can override it, and you can get help to override it. But today's adult bullies are often master manipulators and really get into your head, and you don't understand what's happening. Well, if you read my book, you'll understand what's happening and hopefully be able to resist it.
Everybody needs to get this book, okay? I'm telling you, I read it. I don't have a copy. I had to read the PDF, but it is so great, and it really takes this all apart and really defines everything. So you will understand this, and it's for everybody because, as I said in the beginning of the show, we all come across this. We all get impacted with it, and I don't think people realize how quickly they can get into your psyche.
Right, right. Oh,
Very
matter of
quickly.
minutes sometimes. If
Hmm.
you're unprepared,
Hmm.
people become immobilized and they're like absorbing the bully story, as if this is the accurate view of the world, and now they never feel quite the same about themselves.
Right.
And that's as soon as that's happening, look out.
I get it, and we're going to talk about the love bombing because that's a big part of the beginning of all of this in many cases. Um, okay, so okay, um, you talk about so my mother was a narcissist,
Mm,
and I remember she was a very covert bully. Okay,
mhm.
but it was her inflection, it was the look in her eye, it was the posture. And you say, bullies communicate their power through primitive images, sounds, words of strength, rather than providing useful information or problem solving. They hook our primitive responses this way without us even realizing it. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, this is one chapter. Actually, it's the second of the 10 powers. At first, I was going to title it "The Power of Getting into Your Head," but I just instead titled it "The Power of Three Primitive Emotions." And so this is that combination of fear, anger, or rage, and love, loyalty. And it gets into your head because the like the love bombing, like you're saying, is it just makes you feel like I have to get oriented around this person's view of the universe, and that maybe I am in danger, and maybe I am a big problem, and maybe I am inadequate, and this person, and so they can get in there quickly. They don't have to say very much. Just say, "Wow, you're really a mess. I'll take care of you. Don't worry. I'll take care of you. I'm all you need." And it's a scary world out there. And you can get that story out in like an elevator speech. But the thing is that hooks you is that love bombing. Is people go, "Wow, no one's ever cared about me so much as this stranger I just met in the elevator." they, they say, "Wow, ma'am, you look so, you're so beautiful and so sad. Let me take care of you." And or to a man, women do this to men too.
Yep.
And it's very seductive because in many ways we want more attention and we like emotional intensity. And so these folks target what we want. And people don't realize that's why they're saying what they're saying, to get what they want. They're not describing reality and they're not describing me. They're describing a world that they say I'm in. It will give them control and dominance over me. So it's again self-awareness of what's going on.
Exactly. There's so many things that we can watch out for, and we're going to talk about that, at the end because I think that's really so important. But talking about body language and things like that. So one of these,
Oh yeah.
yeah. So you can't accuse somebody of looking at you funny. And so it's so powerful because you know it, but you can't say, "Why did you look at me like that?" And they're like, "Look at you like how? I didn't look at you anyway." Right? Or
Right.
you said that, but there was some sound in your voice that made it very scary. What are you talking
Yeah.
about? I just said blah, blah, blah. Right?
Right.
So they cannot be pinned down when they do these things.
It's all deniable. So yeah, so I think I got a little bit off from the core of what you're focused on here. So the image of strength is, facial expressions, maybe, of having a big car or a big wallet or something. This gets your primitive thinking of this is a wonderful person. This is a powerful person. This is the kind of person I need to be around. Their tone of voice can be very friendly and charming and soft and seductive or very authoritative, like, watch out, I'm in charge here. And the words they use, and this is what's fascinating, is hyperbole. I never really understood what that word was, but it's you break it down and it's hype. It's hype. You're being hyped, you
Right,
know?
exactly.
And so hyperbole is exaggerated words, the always and never, and I'm the best and you're the worst. Those kinds of exaggerated words. And what they do is they activate our primitive emotions rather than logic. And yet it's totally deniable. They can say, oh, I never said you were an idiot. But they gave you the message with, you're extremely unintelligent, you're extremely bad at this and and it's the extreme words activate our unconscious or subconscious emotions. And especially when you get into leaders, either group leaders, business leaders, political leaders, all of that, is they use a lot of hyperbole, a lot of exaggerated words, and then if they get called on it, they say, "No, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that." And so they can deny it. And people go, "Well, it's just not logical." And people will fact check, like we're heading into political season. So we've got all these candidates, thousands of candidates around the country. And if a bully leader says absurd stuff, then somebody fact checks them afterwards and says, oh, well, that's not true, that's not true, that's not true. They've totally missed the point. The point was the emotional message, and the emotional message has already been delivered, and the fact check is too late for that. And as media repeat these messages, they do more and more damage, and then they fact check, and that fact check's too late. It's the emotional message that gets into our lower minds that then influences how we see the world. So repetition, especially in a political season, you got to be real careful. And if you hear something, check it out before you repeat it to somebody else.
Good point. It's so confusing. There's,
Yeah.
I mean, it's
But it makes sense once you kind of learn this.
mhm,
That's my hope.
right. Well, if we assume, and this is, people say, oh, I give everybody the benefit of the doubt. And I said, no, no, no. This is a very predatory world. You just can't do that. It's not 1950 and 1960 where everybody knew everybody and you didn't leave your neighborhood and you didn't have
Right.
internet and everything. Now we have to be so hyper vigilant in checking people
Hmm.
out because there are so many predatory people globally. It's everywhere.
Right. Right. It's the story. And just hearing them will affect you, infect you. In a sense, it's like
Infected,
a virus.
right?
Yeah.
It does infect
Yeah.
you. So let's
And they
talk
can.
about how we're going to how people can avoid this.
So I put in the book 6 strategies. And the very first one is recognize the pattern of behavior. So recognize the bully story, recognize that they don't stop themselves. Right there, that's one of the biggest problems is people say, like say in the workplace, well, my manager was picking on me today. But he'll realize that, that's pointless or he'll bother somebody else. Well, not necessarily. We think, well, so and so learned his lesson. Not necessarily. If they have a bully personality, they're acting the way they're going to act and the way they've always acted. So somebody else has to stop them. And that's one of the most important messages is don't rely on yourself. Talk to somebody. Don't feel isolated, because if you're isolated with a bully, your self-esteem drops and it gets harder to get away from it. So the first thing is recognizing the pattern of what you're dealing with. How to do that? Well, read my book because I have the 10 powers to recognize. The second thing is pull the plug on the bully. See if there's some way that you're actually supporting the bully. And one might be just that you're keeping it a secret. And they may have said, now don't tell anybody. Well, that's very common for bullies because they want to keep you isolated. Well, tell somebody, a friend, a neighbor, talk to somebody so you don't feel alone and can kind of think it through logically. What should I do now? How can I protect myself? In the workplace, maybe you go to human resources or to maybe it's your supervisor bullying you, so go to some other supervisor or higher up in the organization. Look at your choices, realize you always have choices, and tell yourself, I'm not going to get hooked by this bully. I know exactly what they're doing, and it's not about me, it's about them. And so that helps you unplug their power, your self-talk. No one deserves to be bullied. I don't deserve to be bullied. Such an important message. The third thing I focus on is setting limits. And this can be personal, this can be organizational. So in a one-to-one situation, you might say, hey, I don't agree with you. You know, they might say you're an idiot. So, well, I don't agree with you. I think I did it correctly. Or just cut it out. Or leave me alone, buddy. You know, or we'll have to agree to disagree. You know, I've had bullies that I've done that with, and they say, well, I don't agree that we agree to disagree. And I say, well,
Right.
that's where I'm ending the conversation. We'll have to agree to disagree.
And let me
Goodbye.
just let me just say something here, and I want you to
Sure.
continue because this is really good. Um, they condition us to be afraid of the rage. So we don't want to say anything because we don't want that blow up because it can be
Right.
terrifying, right?
Right. And that's that primitive emotional power, because rage is how it's described. The book where I read about these seven primitive emotional powers, they don't say anger, they say rage. And when you think of a raging bull that's charging a red cape or something like that. And people that get into rage as adults are really inappropriate. It's very rare that, I mean, in a life or death situation, that might give you the energy to survive, but there's very few of those in daily life.
Right.
So rage really isn't appropriate. But what I suggest is that people keep it small. Like if you just say, you're going to need to stop, or setting limits, you might say, if you keep talking to me this way, I'm going to have to leave the conversation. And the other person escalates, and you say, I see I have to leave the conversation. Call me when you're ready to talk civilly. Goodbye.
Right. Very good.
So it doesn't have to be big. You don't have to make a big deal about them, and make it about what you're going to do. Because you can't control what they do. You can't say, now stop being angry. But you can say, if you keep being angry, I'm leaving the conversation. You have control over that, you
And
know.
and just quickly, um, many people will say to me, well, I've set boundaries and they don't listen to them. And I say, well,
Ah,
there's no boundary without a consequence, okay? So
that's it.
if you don't set a consequence, there's no reason for them to stay within your boundary, and so this is what you're talking about.
Absolutely, because that's the fourth strategy is the consequence. And you're right. And that's why setting limits doesn't work with bullies if you don't have consequences to back it up. Because bullies, remember, they have unrestrained personalities. They don't stop themselves. So if you just say, cut it out and stop, there's a good chance they're not going to do that. If
Hmm.
you say, cut it out and stop, or I won't help you with, whatever project, or I won't stay in the conversation, um, that's the consequence. Now, organizations have consequences too. They can, put someone on probation. They can have a meeting about a person and say, hey, we're not sure if you're a good fit for our organization. So consequences is what gets the attention of bullies, not the setting of limits. But you need to set the limit to then impose the consequence because that may help you in the future if you impose the consequence. Like, let's say a supervisor says, you're going to have to take the day off to think about whether you want to work in this organization anymore. And so we'll see you on Thursday. And they come in on Thursday, and then the next week they start acting that way again. And the supervisor says, do you need another day off? And, oh, no, I'll behave, you know.
Right. Right.
So it's the limit and the consequence. And I've seen that. Can I give you a quick example?
Sure.
So I represented a woman who'd been a victim of domestic violence, victim survivor, and she had 2 kids, she and her husband. So I'm representing her. Well, the husband doesn't have a lawyer, so he can call me and negotiate their settlement, their divorce. And so he called me up, says, and you tell that blah, 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 making up some bad words, that she better do this, this, and this. And I said, hey, you can't talk about my client that way, or I'm going to hang up. And he said, well, I'll talk any way I want, and she is a blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I see you've chosen for me to hang up. When you're ready to talk civilly, give me a call. Goodbye. So the next day he calls me up and he starts in like that again. And I say, if you're going to keep talking that way, I'm going to have to hang up, remember? And he said, no, don't hang up. We really have to solve this. And he controlled himself after that.
Which shows
And
that this is a choice.
yes, it's not an easy choice for them, but if they really, if there's something they're desperate enough to want to get, they're willing to suppress this side at least for 10
It's like
minutes.
a compulsion. They have a compulsion, but it can be suppressed, right? And let them move
Yes.
on, you know, get them off of you. I mean, you can't save the world, but get them off of you.
Yeah, no, and that's true. Often what happens is they find someone else to bully, and it's sad. Like in divorce situations, it's like, find dates for your ex. So, but and sometimes people say, should I, he's got a new girlfriend. Should I tell her what he's like? And I said, well, you always choose your battles, but I'd suggest not to.
No.
Let her figure this out. And maybe someday she'll come to you and ask for information and advice, then tell her whatever. But
Right.
uninvited advice often doesn't work.
Right. And,
Yeah.
and empathetic people, sensitive people, that's another thing that I hear a lot, and you probably do too. Randy, I want to learn about this because I want to help my siblings get away from our mother.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
a tough
say,
one.
exactly. And I say, you can't help somebody else do this. They have to come to it in their own way. They have to have had enough and they have to do their research. You can give them information, but you can't
Hmm.
pull them out. You can't.
Yeah, you can offer, but say, I love you, and if you want some suggestions, feel free to come to me.
Hmm. But you have no power to pull them out. Okay, so did I stop you in the middle of of talking about your things
Oh,
to,
my 6 strategies. Yes. So we got up to number 4,
okay,
the imposing consequences. And in my book, I've got 60 examples, and the majority of them have people having limits set and consequences threatened or taking place. And so this is the consequences is such an important part. And sometimes it's legal consequences. The 5th one is educating others, is tell people what you see, what these patterns are. Let people know you can connect the dots here of what's going on, and that bullying is happening at a larger extent than people realize because it's mostly done in private. But when we see it in public, it shocks us. But we need to say, that's going on even more in private. So we need to be careful and support each other. And that's the 6th one, is standing with others when you see that they're being bullied. And like say in the workplace, the example I give is you don't have to have a major confrontation with a bully. You can just say, that's enough, Joe, or that's enough, Jane. That's all you have to say, just a phrase. And that often stops a bully because they think that everyone's consenting to their bullying behavior of someone.
Right.
And just knowing I don't agree with what you're doing right now, buddy, is throws them off because without group support or tolerance, at least, they're not going to get very far.
Yep.
And they know that. So they pick on one person and hope nobody else notices, or they try to get other people to join in laughing at the person. And what they call in the workplace mobbing is, hey, this is the person that made us lose the contract. And no one knows the story. They just go, oh, that was a terrible thing that happened. And this is the person to blame. Well, we're angry at this person. Well, this isn't the person to blame, but they manipulate like that. So people need to be aware, but stand with others and just say, hey, that's not okay, or that's enough. And often that's all you have to do.
And, like for instance, in the workplace, often if everybody stands up to this person, eventually they're going to go, they're going to leave because they're not getting what they need there. So you don't have to make a whole big fuss. You just have to let them know this is not tolerable. And if everybody does the same thing, they're going to be like, I'm going somewhere else because I can't manipulate these people.
That's all the little fish on the cover of my book. If we all the little fish get together, they can intimidate the big fish and scare the big fish off. And you see the little fish getting away because all the other little fish got together. So that's the sixth strategy. And frankly, in today's world, everyone's going to need to step up a little bit more to protect everyone else. Last thing I want to make sure I get in here is I don't think bullies are all that conscious of what they're doing. They don't sit down and decide, I'm going to harass so-and-so. It's part of their personality. It feels automatic to them, and they justify it in their mind, and mostly they don't even think about it.
That's right.
And so if you realize that they may have ancient personalities that in primitive times were helpful. They got people organized, people were stronger in groups, and often their leaders were bullies. But today we live in a more equal world where bullies really stick out like a sore thumb. And we don't need to eliminate them. They may have something to offer. We just need to restrain the rough edges, restrain them enough that they don't harm or dominate other people.
Exactly. And that's, harm or dominate other people. If you are being harmed or dominated, it's time to stop restraining and it's time to remove yourself. There's no point in staying and trying to, corral this behavior if you're being affected. You really have to realize that you've got to get away from them. And I wanted to ask you one quick question before we stop. What's the difference between childhood bullies and adult bullies?
The big difference is childhood bullies learn that it's not okay. And 90% of childhood bullies aren't bullies as adults. But the 5 to 10% of adults who are bullies as adults usually were bullies as children and maybe go back to early childhood. So, most kids just try out bullying to see what happens, and it may be an impulse. I know I bullied my younger brother some, and we love each other and we get along great today, but there were moments where I may have said a mean thing here or there, and I learned that's not cool. And so we were like best friends since we were maybe 14 or 15. But, people try stuff out and see what happens. And the bullies often tried stuff out and got away with it, or they were so bullied themselves or abused themselves that they've learned this is the way you got to deal with life. Right. And that's sad. Bullies aren't happy people. No. And so I think understanding this doesn't work for them, but if we set limits, maybe they can have some success and can have some friends and can have decent relationships if they can manage their behavior. So coaching and limit setting, sometimes a prison sentence motivates change.
Sometimes, yes, and so
Yeah.
and everybody, there are so many resources for you. If you find yourself in a situation and you feel like you're stuck, so there's so many professionals that are out there to help you to sort of interrupt this pattern. And it is a very predictable pattern, right, Bill?
Oh, absolutely. And it's amazing how predictable it is.
Mhm.
People just have to have their eyes open, but it's hidden in plain sight if you know what to look for.
It truly is. Well, thank you so much. I think this book is so valuable to everybody. We all need to have this information. We need to change the nature of our society, of this global society, because it's getting out of control. And understand you don't have to be the compassionate person to everybody. You
Right.
have to make sure you're okay. Okay, that's so important. You have to be okay before you start reaching out for everybody else to help everybody else. And so
Yep.
it's great to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here with us again. I've really enjoyed
Thanks
it.
for having me on again, Randy. I really
Sure.
enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah, me too. All right, have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thank you.